It evidently appears that the Egyptians, as ancient as they are, could not be united into a civilized, polished, industrious body till very long after all the people that have passed in review. The reason whereof is clear. Egypt, as far as the delta, is enclosed by two chains of rocks, between which is the fall of the Nile, in descending from Ethiopia from south to north. From the cataracts of the Nile to its entrance, in a straight line, the distance is only 160 leagues, of 3,000 geometrical feet each, and its breadth is no more than 13 and 20 leagues till it washes the delta, a low part of Egypt, which comprehends an extent of 50 leagues from east to west. On the right of the Nile are the deserts of Thebais, and on the left the uninhabitable sands of Libya, which extend as far as the little country where the temple of Ammon was erected. The inundations of the Nile must, in the course of ages, have removed all of the columns of land which was 4 months in the year under water. These stagnant waters, continually increasing, must for a long time have made all of Egypt one continued morass. This is not the café upon the shores of the Tigris, the Indus, the Ganges, and the other rivers, which also overflow almost every year in the summer when the snow melts. Their inundations are not so great, and the extensive plains to which surround them enable the cultivators to completely profit of the fertility of the soil. We should particularly observe that the plague, that inherent scourge of humanity, breaks out at least once in 10 years in Egypt. It must have been much more destructive when the waters of the Nile, by stagnating upon the land, added their infection to that horrid contagion, and thus the population of Egypt must have been very small for many ages. The natural order of things seems then invincibly to demonstrate that Egypt was one of the last inhabited lands. The troglodytes, born upon those rocks which were washed by the Nile, were compelled to perform labors as continual as they were difficult, to dig canals for the reception of this river, to erect cabins, and to raise them 25 feet above the earth. This was, however, necessary before Thebes with its 100 gates could be built, before Memphis could be erected, or the construction of the pyramids could be thought of. It is very strange, therefore, that no ancient historian has made so natural a reflection. We have observed that in those times wherein Abraham's travels are placed, Egypt was a powerful kingdom. Its kings had already erected some of those pyramids, which still astonish the eyes and the imagination. The Arabs have written that the greatest was erected by Saurid, several ages before Abraham. The time of the building of the famous Thebes with its 100 gates is not known. It seems that in those obscure times, great cities bore the names of the cities of God, such as Babylon. But who can believe that from each of the 100 gates of Thebes, 200 chariots, armed in a warlike manner, and 100,000 warriors issued? They would amount to 20,000 chariots and 1,000,000 of soldiers. And if there is one soldier among every 5 persons, this number might make us suppose 5 millions of inhabitants for a single city, in a country that is not so large as Spain or France, and which, according to Diodorus Siculus, contained no more than 3 millions of inhabitants, and but 60,000 soldiers for its defense. Diodorus says that Egypt was so well peopled that it formerly contained 7 millions of inhabitants, and that even in his time there were 3 million. One cannot give greater credit to the conquests of Sesostris than to the millions of soldiers that issued from the 100 gates of Thebes. Do you not imagine that you are reading the history of Pericles when those who copy Herodotus tell you that the father of Sesostris, founding his hopes upon a dream and an oracle, destined his son to conquer the world, that he brought up all of the children that were born on the same day as his son in his own court to the trade of arms, that they had no victuals allowed them till they had run the length of 8 of our longest leagues, that at length Sesostris appeared with his 600,000 men, 27,000 warlike cars, and set out to conquer all of the earth from the Indus to the Euxine Sea, subjugating Mingrelia in Georgia, and called it Colchis. Herodotus does not in the least doubt that Sesostris left colonies in Colchis, because he saw tawny men with frizzled hair who resembled Egyptians at Colchis. We should much sooner believe that this species of Scythians, upon the banks of the Black and Caspian Seas, came to renounce the Egyptians when they ravaged for such a length of time Asia prior to the reign of Cyrus. We should therefore believe that they carried with them slaves from Egypt, that true country of slaves whose descendants Herodotus might see or thought he saw in Colchis. But these Colchians had, indeed, the superstitions to be circumcised. They probably retained that custom from Egypt, as it always happened that the people of the north adopted the rites of those civilized nations whom they had conquered. The Egyptians were never, at any known period, a formidable people. They were never attacked by any enemy without being conquered. The Scythians began. After the Scythians came Nebuchadnezzar, who conquered Egypt without any opposition. Cyrus had nothing more to do than to send thither one of his lieutenants. When they revolted under Cambyses, one campaign was sufficient to make them submit, and this Cambyses so much despised the Egyptians that he killed their god Apis in their presence. Ochus reduced Egypt to a province of his kingdom. Alexander, Caesar, Augustus, and the Caliph Omar conquered Egypt with equal facility. This same people of Colchis, under the name of the Mamelukes, returned again to seize upon Egypt in the time of the Crusades. At length, Selim conquered Egypt in a single campaign, like all of those who had made their appearance. There never were any other but our Croesus, who suffered themselves to be beat by those Egyptians, the most dastardly of mankind, as had been elsewhere observed. But this was owing to their being then governed by the Mamelukes of Colchis. It is true that a humbled people might formerly have been conquerors, as the Greeks and Romans so testify, but we are more certain of the ancient grandeur of the Romans and the Greeks than that of Sesostris. It cannot be denied that he whom we call Sesostris might have carried on a fortunate war against some of the Ethiopians, some of the Arabs, and some of the peoples of Phoenicia. This was sufficient in the language of some exaggerators to make him the conqueror of the earth. There is no subjugated nation who does not pretend formally to have subjugated others. The vain glory of ancient superiority administers consolation for a present humiliation. Herodotus ingeniously related to the Greeks what the Egyptians had told him, but how comes it that, in speaking to him of nothing but prodigies, they gave him no intimation of the famous plagues of Egypt, of that magical battle between the sorcerers of the Pharaoh and the minister of the god of the Jews, and of a whole army swallowed up in the Red Sea under the waters which rose like mountains to the right and to the left to let the Hebrews pass, and which by their fall drowned the Egyptians? This certainly was the greatest event in the history of the world. For neither Herodotus, Manetho, or Eratosthenes, nor any of the Greeks who were so fond of the marvelous and who kept a regular correspondence with Egypt, mention these miracles, which should employ the attention of all generations. We certainly do not make this reflection to invalidate the testimony of the Hebrew books, which we revere as we ought to. We wonder only at the silence of all the Egyptians and of all of the Greeks. God, doubtless, was unwilling that so divine a history should be transmitted to us by any profane hand. The language of the Egyptians had no affinity to that of the nations of Asia. You do not find among this people the word Adonai or Adonai, nor Baal nor Baal, terms which signified the Lord, nor Mithra, which with the Persians was the sun, nor Melk, which signified king in Syria, nor Shak, which signifies the same thing amongst the Indians. On the contrary, you find that Pharaoh was the Egyptian name that answers to king, Osiris answering to the Mihra of the Persians, and the vulgar word On signified the sun. The Chaldean priests called themselves Maph, those of the Egyptians Koans, as Diodorus Siculus relates. The hieroglyphics, characters, and alphabets of Egypt, which time had spared, and which we still find engraved upon the obelisks, have no relation to those of any other people. Before men had invented hieroglyphics, they had doubtless representative signs, for in fact, what could the first men do besides what we do when we are in their place? Let a child be in a country ignorant of its language, and he will talk by signs. If he is not understood, he will draw upon a wall with a piece of charcoal the things that he wants, if he has the least sagacity. They therefore at first painted in a very clumsy style what they wanted to communicate, and the art of drawing doubtless preceded that of writing. Thus it was that the Mexicans and Peruvians wrote. They had not made any farther progress in the art. Such was the method of all of the first polished people. In time, they invented symbolic figures. 2 hands united signified peace, hearts represented war, an eye signified the divinity, a scepter implied royalty, and lines which joined these figures expressed short phrases. The Chinese at length invented characters to express each word of their language. But what people invented the alphabet, which in placing before our eyes the different sounds that can be articulated, facilitates the combination of all possible words by writing? Who could teach men to engrave thus easily their thoughts? We shall not here repeat all of the stories of the ancients, which eternizes all arts. We shall only say that many centuries were necessary to compass it, for the Koans, or priests of Egypt, continued for a long time to write in hieroglyphics, which is forbidden by the second law of the Hebrews, and when the people of Egypt had alphabetical characters, the Koans adopted different ones, which they called sacred, and in order to keep a constant barrier between them and the people, the Magi and the Brahmins made use of the same kind of characters. So necessary has the art of disguise to men appeared in order to govern them. Those Koans not only had characters peculiar to themselves, but they had still preserved the ancient language of Egypt when time had changed the vulgar tongue. Manetho, who is quoted by Eusebius, speaks of 2 columns engraved by Thoth, the first Hermes, in the characters of the sacred language. But who knows the period of this Hermes' existence? The Egyptians were particularly careful in preserving their first symbols. It is curious to observe upon their monuments a serpent biting his own tail to represent the 12 months of the year, and each of these months expressed by animals which are not the signs of the zodiac known to us. We again see the 5 days added to the 12 months under the form of a little serpent with 5 figures upon it. These are a sparrowhawk, a man, a dog, a lion, and a stork, drawn in the styles of the monuments preserved at Rome. Thus we find that almost everything in antiquity was both symbolical and allegorical.